and Fourier analysis of Boolean functions. And today he's going to talk about quantum weirdness in query to communication simulation and the role of symmetry. So over to you, Manasi.
Yeah, thanks, Nitin. So I would begin by thanking Nitin for inviting me to give this talk. Also, I would like to thank everyone for being present here. Okay, so the title of the talk is Quantum Weirdness in Query to Communication Simulation and the Role of Symmetry. This talk is based on two papers. So the first one was in 2020, and the second one is a recent follow-up work of that paper. So I'll try to present the main results from both of these papers. And here's the plan of the talk. I'll start by a very brief general introduction to computational complexity, where we'll motivate the problems and why we are trying to solve them. Then we'll come to two specific models of computation: query complexity and communication complexity. These are the models that we are interested in this talk. Then in the next part of the talk, we'll look at the results that I'm trying to present in this talk. And our results have two parts: a lower bound part and an upper bound part. The third part of the talk is going to be devoted to the lower bound part, and I'll try to give a complete proof of our lower bound result. And depending on the time, I also have a section on the upper bound part. So we'll see if the time permits. I have a couple of slides on the upper bound result, so we'll go over them. Okay. So let me get started. Okay. So in communication, in the field of computational complexity, the goal is to understand the hardness of computing functions under a certain model of computation. Okay. So what is this? What is understanding hardness means? It means that we want to figure out the amount of cost that is necessary and sufficient to compute a particular function under the correctness requirement of the model. Okay. Now, depending on the different models of computation, there are different notions of costs which lead to different notions of hardness. So here are some measures of hardness that we are familiar with. First is time complexity. So in a suitable model, the time complexity means the amount of time that is necessary and sufficient to compute a function. Space complexity is the amount of space that is necessary and sufficient to compute the function. In the model of query complexity, we are interested in the number of bits of the input that we need to look at or query in order to compute the value of that function on that input. When we talk about sample complexity, we mean the number of bits of the input that we need to sample in order to compute the value of that. In the model of communication complexity, we are interested in the amount of information that has to be exchanged in order to compute the value of that function when the input of that function is distributed across two persons. And similarly, there are various other measures of hardness. Now let us come to quantum computation. For the purposes of this talk, quantum computation is a model of computation. Okay, so what does a model of computation do? It gives us rules under which a computation will be performed. Okay, so here are some questions that a model of computation answers, and there are answers in the classical and the quantum world. So how the question of how to access the input. So we know, as we are used to in the classical world, we access input using bits. In the quantum world, the analogous way to access input is going to be qubits. What are the resources available? In classical world, we have space, time, and randomness as resources that are available to us in order to do computation. In the quantum world, space and time are analogous, and there is an additional quantum resource of entanglement that is provided to this computation. How does communication happen? In the classical world, the communication happens through a classical channel. In the quantum world, the communication takes place through a quantum channel. What are the complexity measures? In the classical world, the complexity measures are running time, query, communication, and sample. And analogously, we have similar complexity measures in the quantum world: running time, quantum query, quantum communication, and quantum sample. The main takeaway from this slide is that, first of all, quantum communication is just a model of computation, and anything that we do in the classical world has its quantum analog. Okay, so in particular, the questions that we ask about functions in the classical world have their natural analog in the quantum world. And what are the main questions in classical and quantum complexity theory? So the first of these questions is understanding the hardness of computing a function. The way to understand the hardness is to first come up with an upper bound. By upper bound, we mean that we want to design an algorithm or a protocol in the model of computation that we are working that uses cost T. Okay, so let's say we are able to come up with such an algorithm. And then what we would like to do is that we would like to prove a lower. We would like to show that we cannot get a better algorithm or a protocol to compute that cost. In other words, we would like to prove that the cost T is optimal. The other major question in complexity theory is to understand the relation between the various measures of practice. For instance, we would like to ask, is time complexity more than space complexity? Is communication complexity at most query complexity? And can quantum complexity measurably be much smaller than its classical analog? Such questions are generally the motivating questions in classical and quantum complexity. The focus of this talk is going to be on two models of computation. The first is the communication complexity and second is query complexity. And we would like to understand the relation between these measures in both the classical and the quantum world. We'll show that the relationship between communication complexity and query complexity in the quantum world is quite different than its relationship in the classical world. In fact, we'll try to argue that this relationship is very counterintuitive and hence justify the title of this talk about the quantum weirdness. Okay. So now let us start by defining these models of computation that we are interested in: query complexity and communication complexity. Okay. So any questions till this point, like what we are trying to do before getting into the formal definitions? Okay. So let me start by defining the query model. In the query model, a function f is known to an algorithm while its input x is unknown. And the goal of the query algorithm is to compute the function fx. Okay, so the function f is known, x is unknown, and the algorithm wants to evaluate fx. Okay. So in order to do this, the algorithm is allowed to make queries to x. So let's see this by an example. So consider the AND function. The AND function on n bits is a function that evaluates to -1 if and only if all the input bits are -1. Okay. So we'll usually make such pictures to denote functions. So here is a picture for AND function on n inputs. And now we give a simple query algorithm to evaluate this function. So the algorithm is as follows. The algorithm will first query the first bit of the input, Z1. If that bit turns out to be 1, then the algorithm can stop at that point because the value of the function is 1, right? If the value of Z1 is -1, then the algorithm cannot yet decide what the value of AND on that input is, right? So it will have to query the next bit, Z2. And the algorithm proceeds so on. And after making n queries, it is able to evaluate the function. So this, so can you see my pointer, the mouse that I'm moving?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So this picture on the right hand side is a query algorithm or a decision tree for computing the AND function. And the cost of this algorithm is n. We'll come back to the definition of cost. Now let us define the quantum query model. So we have a function f that is known to us, a function on n bits, and a quantum query algorithm with t queries is a sequence of unitary operations. Okay, so there are two unitaries, two types of unitaries, u0, q0, u1, q1, and so on till ut. Okay, so here the unitaries q's correspond to making queries to the input. And after making query, we need to do some computation before making the next queries, and u's are the unitaries that do this job. Okay, so q's are the unitaries that are going to depend on the input, and u's are the unitaries that do not depend on the input. Okay? And the algorithm is going to start at some state. I've denoted this by psi naught, and the result of the computation is going to be measuring this state. After applying all these unitaries to the starting state. So I'm not defining what measuring precisely means. Yeah, I'm leaving that to intuition for now. And Okay, and we say that the algorithm, the query algorithm, this sequence of unit trees computes the function f if for all x in the domain of the function, the result of the measurement is going to be equal to the value of that function with probability at least 2/3. Okay, so let me say this once more. So for any input, we want that when we measure or when we try to find out the value of the first bit, let's fix a qubit and we measure it, and then we want that answer to be equal to be the correct value of that function on that input with high probability at least 2/3. Okay. Now there are various variants of the query model. So we'll talk about two variants in the classical world and one quantum variant that we just defined. And depending on these variants, there are various characteristic requirements. Okay, so in the classical world, in the deterministic query model that we looked at a slide before this one, or 2 slides before this one, the queries were in the form of bits, right? And the correctness requirement for an algorithm that computes the function was that that algorithm should compute the function correctly on all inputs. Now, these classical deterministic algorithms can also be provided the extra resource of randomness.
Manasvi,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. Seems like Girish has some question.
Sure. So I cannot.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So could you go back to the previous slide?
Sure.
So so the input is the entire function f, right?
No. The input is a string x. The function f is known to us. For instance, f could be the AND function. But the input on which we want to evaluate AND is not known to us.
I see.
Yeah.
So the Qs depend upon the x and
right.
Yeah, and f in some sense.
Yeah. So yeah, Qs depend upon x.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So now the randomized variant of this query model is obtained by giving the deterministic algorithms the power to toss coins. Okay? Based on the outcome of the coin tosses, the deterministic algorithms can now make queries. So the extra resource in this case is randomness. And here again, the queries are bits. And since randomness is involved, we want our algorithm computing the function to be correct with high probability at least 2/3 for us. Okay. And then we have the quantum query model, where the queries can be qubits. And again, here also, since the model, by the setup of the quantum model, we require our algorithm to be correct with probability at least 2/3. Now let us define the cost of an algorithm that computes a function. So cost of an algorithm is the maximum number of bits that the algorithm queries over all inputs. So we are looking at the maximum number of bits that the algorithm over the worst case of the inputs. So this is the cost of a particular algorithm, and the query complexity of the function is going to be the cost of the best algorithm that computes that function. And in the rest of this talk, we are going to use the notation DF, RF, and QF to denote randomized query complexity, to denote the deterministic, randomized, and quantum query complexity of F respectively. Okay, so this was the first model that we wanted to define. Now let us define the communication model. So intuitively, the communication complexity of the function is the amount of messages that need to be sent between two players for computing the function on an input when the input is split between the players. Okay. So there are different ways of splitting the input between two players, and many of them are interesting. In this talk, we are going to focus on one particular way to split the input. So let me make this slide a bit precise. So there is a function f that two players, Alice and Bob, wish to compute. Okay. So the input, so Alice is given so the function f is on n bits. Alice is given an n bit string. Bob is also given an n bit string. And they want to evaluate the following function. They want to compute this function f on the bitwise XOR of their respective inputs. So I hope the function that they wish to compute is clear, right? Okay, and in order to do this, Alice and Bob are going to send messages to each other. Okay? So depending on her input, Alice is going to send a message to Bob. Bob will see what message he got from Alice, and depending on his input, Bob will send another message to Bob, and this process will repeat. And the messages that Alice and Bob send to each other are according to a predetermined protocol. So before getting their inputs, Alice and Bob sat together. They knew the function beforehand, and they came up with a protocol using which they'll communicate messages to each other. The protocol runs for k messages, and then the protocol stops. And at the end of the protocol, both Alice and Bob, for a correct protocol, should have computed the value of that function on that input. Okay. And we also assume that Alice and Bob have unbounded computational power. So the only cost, the focus here is on the messages, the number of messages that have to be sent in order to evaluate the function. Okay, so this is the deterministic communication model. Okay, and instead of XOR, we can replace any XOR with any other 2-bit predicate. Okay? And it makes sense to work only with non-constant 2-bit predicate, and we'll get the following communication problem. So in order to get this derive this communication problem, we needed two things. We needed a function f, and we needed a 2-bit predicate, which we used to split the inputs between Alice and Bob. Okay. So let's look at an example of a simple communication protocol. So we are looking at the equality problem. The problem is defined as follows. Alice is going to be given a string n-bit string x, Bob will be given an n-bit string y, and their goal is to decide whether x is equal to y or not. Okay. And the communication protocol for this problem in the deterministic world is very simple. Alice will send x1 to Bob, her first bit. Bob will see whether x1 is equal to y1 or not. If they are indeed equal, then Bob will send y2 to Bob, and the protocol continues. And this protocol correctly computes equality, right? So also it can be verified that equality is indeed of this form. The form that we have been discussing in the last 2 slides. Okay. Now let me define the quantum communication model. So let f be a function whose so we will call this a 2-party function. So one part of the input will be given to Alice, other part of the input will be given to Bob. Okay. And Alice and Bob are going to be given an additional resource of unlimited ERP pairs or unlimited entanglement shared between them. And this is a free resource that is provided to Alice and Bob. And we are also allowing this model to Alice and Bob to communicate qubits to each other. So like bits were communicated in the classical world, they can communicate qubits to each other. So let me say a couple of words that this model is a pretty general model, and later on we are going to prove lower bounds against this model. So yeah. Okay, and now continuing with the definition of the quantum communication model. Now the state of the system is going to consist of 3 parts. So Alice's input, which is going to be x, a communication channel, which is going to be an arbitrary length qubit, and then Bob's input y. Now Alice will apply a unitary to her input and the channel. This is the communication channel. Alice will apply a unitary to her input and the channel. Okay. And this application of unitary corresponds to Alice's computation and the communication. Okay. And the cost of, so we are now talking only about what Alice does. And the cost of this one communication is going to be the number of qubits of this channel that are being affected. Okay. And Bob also does the same. And in this way, the protocol continues. So Alice applies a unitary to her input and the channel, then Bob does the same, and the protocol continues. And at the end, they are going to perform a measurement to evaluate the value of the function. So this is the formal definition of quantum communication model. But in the rest of the talk, we are not going to rely upon these definitions. The focus is on proving lower bound. We'll require some black box results that will use, and we can safely forget about the definitions of these models.
So what about the shared EPR pairs?
Yeah, so this is a
you're saying the unitary is applied only to the channel and Alice's input, but it should also be applied to the pair also, no, that is shared between them.
I mean, we can include that here also, but we have just provided this as an extra resource for now. So let's say they want to do some random coin tosses to aid their communication, right? And if they want to do that, then they can just measure this EPR pairs and simulate random coin tosses.
I see. Okay.
And similar to the classical world, we have three variants of interest: the deterministic communication model, the randomized communication model, and the quantum communication model. And so the correctness requirement for the deterministic communication model is that we want for all inputs that the value of the protocol should be equal to the value of the function. In the randomized communication model, we assume that Alice and Bob have access to shared randomness, by which we mean that there are some coins that are tossed randomly, so unbiased coins that are tossed randomly, and both Alice and Bob can see the outcome of these coin tosses. So this is an extra resource that is provided to them. And in this case, we want the protocol, the communication protocol, to evaluate the function with probability at least 2/3. And we just defined the quantum communication model, where so this should be messages instead of queries, where the messages are qubits, and the extra resource that we gave to them was entanglement, the shared EPR pairs. And again, we wanted the communication protocol to evaluate the function correctly with probability at least 2/3. And similar to the classical world, to the query model, we define the cost and the communication complexity. The cost of a protocol being the maximum number of qubits communicated over all inputs, and the communication complexity is the cost of the best protocol that computes the function. And the notation that we'll use for the rest of this talk is DCC of F composed with a 2-bit predicate for deterministic communication complexity, and similarly for randomized and quantum communication complexity. Okay. So in the rest of this talk, our focus is going to be to compare the query complexity of a Boolean function f with the communication complexity of f composed with a 2-bit predicate. So any questions at this point? This is the one of the main slides that we want just to note that what we are comparing in the upcoming talk. So let me proceed. Okay, so now we'll go on to state our results. So first, let us start with the classical world. We have a function f, a Boolean function f. Now we make this following simple observation, that for all Boolean function f, the deterministic communication complexity of that function composed with a 2-bit predicate is at most the deterministic query complexity of that function. So let's look at an example. This example will, I hope, make the proof very clear. So let us start with the decision tree or a query algorithm for a function f. Let us take this decision tree as an example. Now, Alice and Bob want to use this decision tree to come up with a communication protocol for this function. Okay, so let's say Alice and Bob want to come up with a communication protocol of f composed with XOR on 2 bits. Okay. So since Alice and Bob know the function beforehand, they know this decision tree. Okay, so all they have to do is that since Alice and Bob know that, okay, in this decision tree queries the bit Z1 first, So now Alice will send her bit x1 to Bob, and Bob will do perform the XOR of x1 with his first bit y1 and send that bit back to Alice. When Alice gets back that bit, they know that, okay, the value of this bit, depending on whether it is 1 or -1, they know in which subtree they have to perform the rest of the computation now, right? So in other words, with only a factor of 2 overhead, they were able to simulate any query algorithm for the function to get a communication protocol, right? So here is the proof. So for any function f, the communication complexity is at most the twice the query complexity in the deterministic communication world. And the proof was simply to simulate the query algorithm for f to get a communication protocol for f composed with a 2-bit predicate. So now the question that we'll come back to after a couple of slides is that can we efficiently simulate quantum query algorithms to get quantum communication protocol? So we'll come back to this question. So this is what we just proved, that the deterministic communication complexity cannot be much larger than the query complexity of that function. Turns out that this also holds for the randomized in the randomized world when additional randomness is provided. So what about the quantum communication complexity? Is it upper bounded by some constant time the quantum query complexity of f? Okay. And if we base our intuition on the classical world, then we would like to believe that, okay, this is the case, right? That the communication complexity is at most the query complexity, times some constant. Okay. So now let's come back to quantum query to communication simulation. So for this theorem is a well-known simulation theorem that simulates a quantum query algorithm to get a quantum communication protocol. The theorem says that for any Boolean function f and any non-constant, so we are interested only in non-constant 2-bit predicates, and any non-constant 2-bit predicate, the quantum communication complexity is at most the quantum query complexity times log n, some constant times log n. So the presence of log n factor is something that we should note here, and we are going to call this theorem due to Burman, Cleave, and Wigderson, we'll call this theorem as BCW simulation theorem. And the main question that we want to address in this talk is that whether the log n overhead that was required in BCW simulation is necessary. Turns out that the answer is no for the canonical problem of set disjointness. So in the world of communication complexity, set disjointness is one of the central problems and plays the role of SAT in the complexity theory that we are.
Manasvi?
Yeah.
Girish has some question. Sorry.
Yeah,
Girish,
so
go ahead.
How does a quantum decision tree work? Maybe you could just comment quickly.
Yeah, so quantum decision tree, we cannot describe the quantum decision tree as by making a tree like this. So in fact, let me go back a couple of slides. So this is the definition of quantum decision tree as a sequence of queries followed by computation.
I see.
Yeah.
There's another question from Sai.
Sorry, what was the question, I believe?
Okay. Is there a question?
So one more question, Manasvi.
Yeah.
So in decision tree, like what you do in the next step depends upon the result of the queries in the previous step.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But when you're composing this set of unitary transformation, are we like so you can choose a later unitary transformation based on something that happened previously?
Yeah.
So you're not,
sorry. Preferred.
So the way you defined it earlier, you were specifying the entire set of unitaries, no?
Yeah. Although we were specifying entire set of unitaries, but we could do the following. We could start applying, let's say, these 3 unitaries, and then we could measure in between. And depending on that outcome, we can apply the next unitary. And from a known result in quantum, all the measurements can be shifted towards the end of the computation by another.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Let me get back to the slide. Right. So we were looking at this simulation theorem by Borman, Cleve, and Wigderson, which said that for any Boolean function f, the quantum communication of that communication complexity of that function, when composed with a 2-bit predicate, is at most some constant times the quantum query complexity of that function times log n. So this simulation theorem, which we are calling BCW simulation theorem, has a log n overhead. And the main question for this talk was whether this log n overhead is necessary or not. In fact, if there is any overhead in simulating query algorithms to get communication protocol in the quantum world, that would be a bit surprising. So yeah. And we were looking at the disjointness problem, canonical problem in communication complexity. And turns out that there is no overhead required for this problem. Right? So the disjointness problem can be written as OR on n bits composed with AND on 2 bits, where Alice is going to be given inputs x1 through xn, Bob will be given input through y1 to yn, and they wish to compute this function.
So it's really the set intersection problem, right? Negation.
Yeah, it's a set intersection problem. Right. Yeah, if we put a negation here, and then it will become a set disjointness problem. Yeah, but we'll just define this to be the disjointness problem for this talk. Yeah. And for this problem, for this case, in 2002, Hoyer and DeWolf showed that only a log star n overhead is required in query to communication simulation. And in 2005, Aronson and Ambinis proved that the problem can be solved with only a constant overhead. So the query protocol for query algorithm for OR can be simulated to get a communication protocol for OR composed with AND on 2 bits using only a constant overhead. The natural question that follows is that okay, the overhead could be avoided for a very important function, but can this overhead be avoided for all functions? And this is our main result. So we showed that we constructed a total function f such that the quantum communication complexity of this total function, when composed with XOR on 2 bits, is lower bounded by the quantum query complexity of the same function times log. So in particular, our result proves that there exists a function for which the BCW simulation theorem is tight. So this overhead in query to communication simulation cannot be avoided for some functions. And in fact, we cannot do better than BCW simulation theorem up to a constant factor. And in a follow-up work, we generalize the above construction to all non-constant size predicates. By this I mean that this theorem works only when the inner function, the way we split the input, we do it using XOR. So in the follow-up work, we said that okay, we can also come up with functions that when composed with AND on 2 bits, witness tightness of BCW simulation. And a bit more generally, we can replace this function not only by AND on 2 bit or XOR on 2 bit, but by any function on constant number of bits. And still, this tightness of BCW simulation can be witnessed by some functions. Okay. And indeed, we give a general recipe to construct functions for which there is an overhead in the query to communication simulation.
Honestly, there is a question. Yeah, okay.
Some quick questions.
Yeah.
So for the disjointness problem,
Yeah.
how much is the quantum distant tree complexity?
Yeah, so for disjointness problem, it is so the outer function here is OR, and for OR the quantum query complexity is square root n.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, yeah.
So the quantum communication complexity is also square root n because of
because of the result of Aronson and unbinders.
disjoint. Okay.
So maybe I will just mention one thing. So for the quantum query complexity, if you want to think with something which is already known, approximate degree captures quantum query complexity up to constant factors, right? Is that correct, Manasvi?
So yeah, quantum query complexity is an upper bound on the approximate degree up to.
Oh, it's not tightly.
No.
Oh, okay, my bad.
In fact, we'll come to that later in this talk.
Okay.
So here, when you said like disjointness, it's not exactly disjointness that you're proving a bound against, right?
Yeah, I should have said this to be intersection rather than.
No. So more like it's like you're bounding the the communication complexity of this set intersection problem by the query complexity of OR.
Yeah.
So this is like kind of a strange thing that. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we should look at this as the query communication complexity of OR composed with, and we are upper bounding with the query with the query complexity of OR.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay.
Girish, sorry, you have some question?
Please.
Yeah, my other question was, so this capital F, so is capital F a very complicated function, or is it a simple function which has low distant tree complexity?
So we'll actually I'll try to give the construction of this capital F in the next half of the talk.
Okay, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah. Okay. So yeah. So our first result and our main theorem is that the BCW simulation theorem is tight. Okay. Now the next question that we want to ask is that Aronson and Baynes were able to avoid that constant overhead when the outer function was OR, right? So can we come up with a natural class of functions for which no overhead is required in this query to communication simulation in the quantum world? In particular, we want to ask what is the property of OR that allows efficient query to communication simulation. Okay, for this, to define this property, I'll have to define the symmetry and transitivity of Boolean functions. So what are
I have another question. So you said instead of like constant number of, so the inner function is it's on constant number of inputs, and in the next paper you said like you actually are increasing from constant to a super constant.
Sorry.
So what was it like? Yeah, this one. Yeah. So you said non-constant size predicates. What is it? What do you mean by that?
I think this should be. I mean, yeah, I think this should be just constant. So this non-constant is a typo.
Okay. No, I think it says non-constant functions on constant bits.
Yeah.
So you mean like f is non-constant and
no. This let's say we are composing f with g, where g is on a constant number of bits, right? So f composed with g, where g defines some communication problem on constant number of bits. So like Nitin said, what I want to say here is that g is a non-constant function, non-constant Boolean function, and but the size of g, the domain size of g is a constant size. And I mean, if we are able to do it for and or, then this result directly follows, because we can restrict that g just so that on some input it will behave like and like or XOR. So right. So that's how.
So I have another question. Like, can composition also work here in some sense? Because
so what?
So I can take any function on like inner function on constant number of bits, and this constant function can be further defined like written in terms of and ors.
Yeah. So yeah, so as long as this function is on constant number of bits, when we write it down as a let's say as a circuit of ANDs and or
Right.
then that AND or structure we can restrict the inputs such that the representation of the inner function G, that it becomes just one AND or one OR.
Okay.
And because everything is a constant, it will still have a constant hiding over here. You can increase the constant over here, and
Okay, makes sense.
yeah, sorry, that's a very not a very good explanation, but yeah, intuitively. Yeah. Yeah. So we were looking at what is the property of this OR function that allows efficient query to communication simulation. And for this, we wanted to define the symmetric and transitive Boolean functions. And okay, so a Boolean function f is symmetric if the function depends only on the Hamming weight of its inputs. Okay, for instance, the OR function, right? If the Hamming weight of the input is 0, then the OR function evaluates to 1, right? And if the Hamming weight of the input is greater than 0, then the function evaluates to -1, right? So this is an example of a symmetric function. Equivalently, we say that f is symmetric if and only if for all inputs, the value of the function, okay, and the value of the function on the on an input where the bits of the input have been permuted according to any permutation from Sn, the value of the function is same. Okay, so these two are equivalent definitions. Okay. Using this as second definition, we can define a generalization of symmetric function known as transitive function. And let's define this next. A function f is transitive symmetric or transitive if for all pair of indices in the domain size of the function, there is a permutation that takes I to j, and the value of the function does not change when we apply this permutation on the input of that function for all inputs. Okay, does it make sense? The definition of transitive symmetric function. So let's look at some examples. So by definition, all symmetric functions are going to be transitive functions, right? Because any permutation that takes I to j, by the definition of symmetry, the value of the function is going to be same when we apply that permutation. Another way to obtain transitive function is by composing a symmetric function with another symmetric function. Okay, for instance, consider OR on n bits composed with AND on n bits. Okay, so this function, as we can verify, is a transitive function, but not a symmetric function. Now let us come back to the question that we were looking at. So what is the property of this OR function that allows the saving in query to communication simulation? Turns out that this property is symmetry, right? So we show that for all symmetric functions f and for all non-constant 2-bit predicates, the quantum communication complexity of f composed with that predicate is at most some constant times the quantum query complexity of that function. Okay, so this is our second result. And finally, we ask the question that does the result for symmetric function generalize to transitive functions? Okay. Or can we spare some symmetry and still have that same saving that we had in the case of transitive functions? And turns out that the answer is no. To show this, we construct a transitive total function f such that for all non-constant predicates, the quantum communication complexity is going to be lower bounded by quantum query complexity of that function times log. Here is a summary of the results that we have been talking about. So first of all, we construct a total function, and more generally, we give a general recipe how to construct such functions such that the quantum communication complexity
I don't know, maybe by mistake.
Could be a power cut.
We are disconnected.
Oh, could be a power cut. Or, no, but his more probably his laptop will have a charge. Oh, acha, you're saying that the Wi-Fi will go away. Let's see.
He's back. He's back.
Yes, he's back.
Manasi, you're muted.
Hello. Yes, sorry,
Yes.
I tried to close a window that was popping up and I got disconnected.
No worries.
Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, means we can see you.
Now?
Not yet.
So I had a quick question while you set up the screen. So I remember there is this old result of Jay Kumar, Rahul Jain, and Pranav Sen, which gives omega n quantum communication complexity for set disjointness.
I think they give an omega n by t, where t is the number of rounds. They give a round communication trade-off. If I'm
yeah. So if t equals constant, it's still omega n, no?
Yeah, but in this case, we'll have square root n round. So we do not consider this a round optimizing question here.
I see. Okay, this is also a lower bound. Okay, I see. Sorry. No, I thought you mentioned that communication complexity of quantum disjointness was root n or something like that.
Yeah. So that protocol uses square root n rounds of communication. It will.
I see.
So sorry, Nitin, I'm not able to share. I'm trying to share, and
what is it saying? Is
not saying anything.
It's not saying anything.
Should I disconnect and join again?
We have done any restriction on sharing?
So let me just disconnect and join again, maybe.
Yeah. Or you can send the PDF to us, so we can also share it here.
Okay. Maybe let me try disconnecting.
Yeah, just try it once, and then if it doesn't work, then you can send us the PDF. Try sharing now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So how much time do I have?
You can take another 10-15 minutes. Yeah.
It's okay. You can take half an hour.
Yeah, actually, you can take half an hour.
Let's go with half an hour.
Okay. Means we have booked your slot until 6:30, and we are anyways interrupting you to ask questions. So yeah, feel free.
Okay, so yeah, I'll try to finish it as soon as possible. Upper bound is half an hour.
No worries, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the results that we discussed till now. So first of all, we showed that we said that we can come up with a total function such that the quantum communication of complexity of that function composed with any 2-bit predicate is lower bounded by the quantum query complexity of that function times log n. We also said that a lot of symmetry helps in query to communication simulation in the quantum world. And we said that the quantum communication complexity of F composed with a 2-bit predicate, it does not require a log n factor. If the function is symmetric, then the log n factor is not required in query to communication simulation. Okay. However, if we relax the notion of symmetry from the functions being completely symmetric to functions being transitive, then thus log n factor is again required. There are functions that witness this. Now, in the second part of the talk, let me try to give the proof of our lower bound theorem, the theorem that witnesses tightness of BCW simulation. And yeah, so let me get started with this part. So let us define some complexity measures of Boolean functions. Okay, for that, we need to state a couple of facts. So every function f with range reals can be represented as a unique polynomial, and this is called the Fourier representation of a function. So every function has a polynomial that uniquely represents it. A polynomial, a real valued polynomial, is said to epsilon approximate a Boolean function f if for every x in the domain of that function, the difference in the value of that polynomial and the value of that function is upper bounded by epsilon. So this should hold for all values, for all inputs x. The approximate degree, the complexity measure that we are interested in, is defined to be the degree of the smallest polynomial that epsilon approximates x for on all inputs. So a degree of the smallest degree of a polynomial that epsilon approximates f uniformly. So this quantity approximate degree has a very nice relation with the quantum query complexity. It was shown by Beals, Burman, Cleve, Mosca, and de Wulf in 1998 that for any Boolean function f, the approximate degree is at most twice the quantum query complexity of that function. Finally, we need one more quantity known as the approximate spectral norm of that function. And this quantity is defined to be the smallest spectral norm of a polynomial p that epsilon approximates a Boolean function f.
Manasvi, question.
Sure.
So there is no upper bound on quantum query complexity in terms of approximate degree, is it? Or it's a polynomial upper bound?
Quantities are polynomially related for total functions.
So what is the polynomial upper bound? It's a square, is it? Or 4?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Not sure.
I think it should be 4 with
4. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't remember it right now.
Yeah, no worries. Just because somehow I had mistakenly thought that they are related up till so they are like theta of each other, but that's not the case.
There are known gaps between.
Oh, there are known gaps, is it? I see. Good. Thank you.
Okay, and for rest of this talk, we are going to choose epsilon to be 1/3 constant. Okay. Now, recall that our overall goal was to lower bound the quantum communication complexity. And for functions that are composed with XOR on 2 bits, we have a very nice theorem due to Lee and Streitman from 2009. The theorem says that the quantum communication complexity of f composed with XOR on 2 bits is lower bounded by the log of the approximate spectral norm of that function. So this works only when the function is the communication problem is defined using XOR. In that case, the quantum communication complexity is lower bounded by the log of the approximate spectral norm of the function f. Now here is the overview of our proof. So we are going to construct a total function f, and we are going to prove 2 theorems. First is going to be an upper bound theorem. We'll show that the quantum query complexity of this function f that we construct is going to be the theta of the approximate degree of that function. The second theorem that we'll prove is the following. We'll show that the log of approximate spectral norm of the function that we construct is going to be omega of approximate degree of that function times log n. Okay. And our main theorem is going to follow using these 3 results above. So the quantum communication complexity of f composed with XOR by the result of Lee and Streitman is lower bounded by log of approximate spectral norm of that function. So this holds for any function f. So in particular, it will hold for other functions that we construct. And then this quantity by our lower bound theorem is going to be lower bounded by the approximate degree of that function times log n. And this quantity is going to be equal to theta of the QF of f times log n by our upper bound theorem. So this is the sketch of our lower bound proof. Any questions? Okay. So let us now start with the construction of our function, and our construction of our function is inspired by a function constructed in Ambinus and de Wolf, 2014. Okay. So the function that we are construct is going to be similar to a composed Boolean function. Okay, and I'll explain later on what this like phrase means here. So the outer function of our function capital F is going to be parity. Let's recall the definition of parity. A parity function on n bits evaluates to -1 if and only if an odd number of bits of its inputs are -1. Otherwise, the function evaluates to 1. Right? And now this parity on n bits we are going to compose with a function add prime, n copies of this of a function add prime that we are going to define next. In order to define this function add prime, we need to define two Boolean functions. So first is a Boolean function called the addressing function, and second is the notion of hard-mode code words. So addressing functions are very intuitive Boolean functions. The addressing function consists of two parts, an address part and an addressee part. So the addressee part has t bits and the address part has log t bits. So for any log t bits that we fix over here, those bits are going to give us an address of a bit in the addressee part. And the value that is present at that bit pointed by the address bits is going to be the value of that function. For example, let us consider this function. Okay, so the address bits point to the location 3, right? And then we go and look at the third bit, it is 0, and this is going to be the output of this function on this input. Okay, so this is the first component that we need, the addressing function. Now let us define hard-mode code words. So let us pick a string of log t bits I. And the hard-mode code word corresponding to this log t bit string is just an enumeration or a list of the parities of all subsets of this log t bit string I. So let's look at an example. Let us take a 2-bit string, 1 minus 1, right? And what are the parities of all the subsets? So the parity of the subset corresponding to the empty set by definition is 1. The parity of the set 1 is just this first bit, that is 1. The parity of the set of the second set, just this bit, is -1, and the parity of the set 1, 2 okay, is the parity of both these bits, which is -1, right? So we just enlist all of them, the parity of all the subsets, and we get the corresponding hard-mode code word to I, 1, 1, -1, and -1, right? So how many hard-mode code words are there? There is one hard-mode code word corresponding to each log t bit string. So there are t hard-mode code words. Okay, and now we are ready to define our function add prime. Okay, so this function is just a simple modification of the addressing function. Recall that in the addressing function, we had log t bits as the address bits and t bits as the target bits. But now what we are going to do is that we'll blow up each target bit, each log t address bits by its corresponding hard-mode code words, right? So if x1 to xt corresponds to some hard-mode code word I, then the output of this modified addressing function is going to be the target bit here yi. Okay, otherwise the function is not going to be defined, right? So as stated, this function is a partial function. We'll make it total in the upcoming slide. And now here is a very important fact and power of quantum algorithms is that if the address bits are indeed hard-mode code words hi for some log t bit string I, then there is an algorithm known as the Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm that returns I, that gives us the value I, the log t bit string I with probability 1 and uses only one quantum query. Okay. So it makes no error. If it is promised that the t bit string is indeed a hard-mode code word, then Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm is not going to make any error and give us the correct seed or the I, the log t bit string I that made up that hard-mode code word. And here is our function that witnesses the tightness of BCW simulation when composed with XOR. So the outer function is parity. Outer function is parity on t bits, and it is composed with these ADT modified addressing functions and t of them. Right. So the function overall is on 2t square bits. And we just need to make it total, and we do it in the simplest way possible. we just fix that if any of these address bits is not a hard-marked code word, then we define the value of this function f to be a constant 1. Okay. Now, in order to prove the lower bound, we need some more notions. Okay, so first off, so we looked at this already before, that every function has a unique representation called the Fourier representation. The spectral norm of that function is just the sum of the absolute value of the coefficients of these monomials. And we are going to use 2 algorithms later on. First is the Grover search algorithm. It's a very useful quantum query algorithm. And we'll use Grover's algorithm to compare equality, to check the equality of 2 strings. Okay, turns out that if we want to check equality of 2 n-bit strings, we can do using Grover search, using only square root 10 quantum queries with error at most 1/3. Okay, and then we already looked at Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm before. And one more result we need in this talk is the following: that the parity function, the approximate degree of parity function is n, exactly n. This is due to Minsky and Papert, a classic result from 1969. Okay. Now let us prove the first lemma, okay, our upper bound lemma. We are going to prove that the quantum query complexity of the function that we constructed is theta t. Okay, so the main part of this proof is in showing that the quantum query complexity of the constructed function is order t. So let's do that first. Okay, the algorithm is to do this is very simple. So we are going to run. So let's recall this function. Let me illustrate the algorithm here. Okay, so this function has a t ADT primes getting as inputs to the parity on t bits, right? So we are going to run Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm on the address bits of each of these ADT primes. Okay, we are going. So these are the bits that corresponded to the address bits. We'll run Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm t times on each of them. Okay, and every run of the Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm will give us a string of length log t. So this corresponds to our guessing process. Okay, and then we are going to check whether the address bits are indeed hard-marked code words or not using Grover search. We'll do this by comparing, by checking the equality of these 2 strings. Okay, so for the first string, okay, so let me just say what this z1 is. So when we ran Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm on the address bits of first ADT prime, we obtained a string z1. Okay. If it was promised that these address bits were hard-marked code words, then z1 would have been the correct seed corresponding to the hard-marked code word. But that is not promised in this case, right? So that's why we need to go for this checking stage. Having obtained z1, we can construct hz1 offline without making any queries, which is going to be a t-bit string. Similarly, we'll do construct these hzi's for each I from 1 to t. And then we'll compare the equality of these 2 t² bit strings using Grover search. Okay. And if the Grover search says that, okay, the guess was indeed correct, right? Then we'll query the bits that are pointed out by these addresses, z1 to zt, and return their parity. Otherwise, we'll just give output 1, which was the output of the function when one of the address bits of ADT prime was not a hard-marked code word. Okay, and the correctness of this algorithm is easy to verify. So if all address bits to ADT primes were indeed hard-marked code words, then the guess step would give us correct string with probability 1. Probability 1 is very important here. So we'll get correct string z1 to zt prime correct with probability 1. Okay. The next step was to check this, and Grover search makes error at most 1/3. Right. So with probability 2/3, we'll come up with the correct string hz1 to hzt. Okay. So this is in fact going to be equal to this thing, and to the concatenation of all the address bits of all ADT primes. And in this case, the Grover's algorithm will make error at most 1/3. Okay. Hence, our overall algorithm will give correct answer with probability at least 2/3. On the other hand, if there is a non-hard-marked code word present as the address bit of one of the ADT primes, then we'll get the value of the corresponding hz the one that we constructed offline, is not going to be equal to the string that was present there, right? In this case, again, Grovers will identify that the strings are different. The check step has not matched with probability at least 2/3. Okay, and in this case, we were giving output 1, and again we are computing function correctly with probability at least 2/3. Finally, let us see how many queries we had to make. So Bernstein-Vazirani algorithm makes only one queries, and we did this once for each of the t ADT primes, which leads to t queries. And then we did Grover's search on strings of length 2t on the length of length t square, which used order of t many queries. So the total query complexity of our function is order t. Okay, this lower bound comes from Beals et al. The lower bound on approximate degree comes from Beals et al. And finally, let us note that the outer function is parity, right? So by restricting some of, let's say, let us restrict all these address bits to ones. Okay, in this case, this function points out to y11, y12, and y1t, and we end up with a parity on t bits, right? And by the result of Minsky and Papert, the approximate degree of this restricted function is lower bounded by omega t. And yeah, this lower bound comes from Minsky and Papert. And overall, we are able to prove that the query complexity of f is in fact theta of the approximate degree of that function. Okay. Right. Now, so in fact, now I'm going to skip the next part of the proof where we prove our main lower bound. But let me just give you one slide idea of how we do this. Okay, so now we wanted to show that the log approximate spectral law of the function that we constructed was omega t log t, right? And in order to do this, we in fact prove a more general result. We prove that for any Boolean function g, the lower bound of approximate spectral law is approximate degree of this function g times log t. This is what we are able to show. And since we chose the outer function g to be parity, we get a lower bound on the approximate spectral norm of omega t log t. Okay, and I'll skip this proof of this lower bound today. Okay, and let me go on to the next part of the. Let me just finish the talk by giving us some words on the proof of the upper bound. So yeah, this is the lower bound part of the talk that I'm skipping. Now let me just say something about why no overhead is required for symmetric functions. Okay. So we want to show that when f is this should be capital F, for any symmetric function f, the quantum communication complexity of f composed with any 2-bit predicate requires no overhead. It is order of query complexity of f. And now the way we'll achieve this is that we'll make a quantum query algorithm with communication protocol which has the same cost as the query algorithm. Okay, so let me take 5 more minutes to finish this part of the talk. So the following is a known result for any symmetric function on n bits. Any symmetric function, there is an interval around n by 2 in which the function is constant. Okay. In fact, this interval around the n by 2 determines the quantum query complexity of that function. Fine. So in order to compute f, it is sufficient to determine whether the Hamming weight of that function lies in this interval. Okay. If it does, it's great. The function is constant. Otherwise, we'll try to find it exactly. And then, since the function is a symmetric function, we'll know the value of that function. Okay. So recall that in our communication problem, f composed with a 2-bit predicate, we want to do this counting on this string, x1, let's say x1 bullet, y1, and so on. Okay. And here is a observation that we can do this counting with order qf bits of communication if we have a quantum communication protocol that can find -1s in the string with costs order square root n. Okay, so this is this observation that we have. So this observation I think was already known in the query world. We have this observation for the quantum world. Okay, so we already have a protocol, right? That can find a -1 in the string at cost at most minus at square root n, the Grover's query algorithm, and we now want to efficiently implement the Grover search in the communications setting. By efficient, I mean without any overhead. Okay, and our communication protocol can in fact be viewed as a distributed implementation of Grover search with a faulty component, which I'll describe next. Okay. Yeah. So what is the faulty component? So the Grover search can be viewed as having two subroutines, which are basically two reflections. So what we do is that we replace one of these subroutines by an imperfect version of the same subroutine, right? The perfect subroutine in the communication world would require log n bits of communication. And we show that the imperfect version, we show using the protocol, a protocol by Aronov et al., that the imperfect version can be implemented with a small error using only constant bit of communication. And then a careful analysis of error gives us the desired upper bound for symmetric function. And in fact, our protocol can be extended directly to see that this protocol can directly be viewed as an efficient implementation of amplitude amplification, a generalization of Grover search. Okay, so what have we shown? We have shown that for symmetric functions, there is no overhead required in query to communication simulation. On the other hand, we have a construction of a transitive function for which BCW simulation is tight. That is, we require a log n overhead. So let me conclude this talk again with the summary of the results that we have been looking at. That first of all, there are total functions for which log n overhead is required for query to communication simulation. Such an overhead can be avoided for symmetric functions. However, if you relax the notion of symmetry and go to transitive functions, there are transitive functions that require log n overhead in query to communication. And yeah, so just let me mention an open problem that is very interesting to me. So the functions that we made here were functions on n bits, and whose query complexity was polynomial in n. It was square root of the size of the input. And for such functions only, we know that an overhead is required in query to communication simulation. So it is very interesting for me to find out if we can come up with functions on n bits whose query complexity is, let's say, polylogarithmic in n, but they witness an overhead in query to communication simulation.
Question?
Yeah, sorry.
So suppose QF is constant, then is overhead required?
Well, in that case, yeah, we'll have to. Okay, so we don't know first of all, but we know this thing for a partial function for Deutsch-Jozsa. There is a problem called Deutsch-Jozsa problem in which the inputs are promised. Okay, so the problem, the inputs are promised to have Hamming weight either n/2 or constant, right? So the input will be either all ones, all minus ones, all constant, or will have Hamming weight of n/2, half ones and half minus one. This problem has quantum query complexity of 1. For this function, it is known that the quantum communication complexity when this Deutsch-Jozsa is composed with XOR on 2 bits has communication complexity of log n. But we don't know whether this log n is, we cannot say whether this log n is additive or multiplicative in this case, right? Yeah. So to answer your question, there is a function known with the constant query complexity whose communication complexity has log n blow up, but we don't know whether that function is indeed whether that blow up is additive or multiplicative. Yeah, so I think if we can come up with a function whose query complexity is non-constant but maybe polylogarithmic in or maybe subpolynomial in the input size. With that witness as an overhead, that would be also be very interesting. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Manasvi, what happens if this capital F is a monotone function?
Yeah, so we haven't explored that. So any reason to ask this?
No, just since you explored symmetric and transitive functions, so then I just wondered. The other thing is in transitive function, is your F again parity?
No.
Oh.
So yeah. In transitive function, my RF is parity. Yeah, but there we have a general, more general recipe to construct such functions. Maybe I can check whether a monotone function fits the bill and get back to you.
Yeah, sure.
For non-symmetric functions, is there an upper bound on quantum communication complexity?
Yeah. So a symmetric function only depends on the Hamming weight of the input, right? So let us look at an interval around n/2 where the function is constant. It turns out that the quantum query complexity of a symmetric function is characterized by this gap around n/2. So if the gap is t, right, then the quantum query complexity is going to be theta of square root n into n minus t, something like that.
T into n minus t, I think.
Or t into n minus t, yeah, maybe.
Possibly, I think so. But I'm not. I'm also.
Yeah, I mean,
my intuition is from the classical world.
Okay. Yeah,
oh, maybe I'm wrong. I should.
Yeah, so for instance, for OR, the gap is of n minus 1, right? So,
yes.
So the query complexity is square root n. For parity, the gap is of 1, right? And the query complexity is n.
Okay, so then maybe it is n into n minus t.
Yeah. But the main point is that the gap characterizes this query complexity.
So, is there any connection between QCC and the original deterministic communication complexity? I mean, deterministic decision tree complexity?
Well, so yeah, we can say that there are some connections. So for instance, the quantum communication complexity is upper bounded by, let's say, even with this log n factor, quantum query complexity times log n. And then for total functions, all the complexity measures are polynomially related to each other. So the decision tree complexity is polynomially related to query complexity, quantum query complexity. So using that, we might be able to get a relation between communication complexity and in the sense that we were looking at, and classical decision tree complexity. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, so QCC is always also upper bounded by 2D, no? Because QCC is going to be upper bounded by DCC, which is upper bounded.
Yeah. That is a correct way to look at it. Yeah. Because Q is always smaller than D, QF is going to be smaller than DF, so it is upper bounded by.
That's all from my side. Talk was very interesting, very interesting results.
Thank you.
Yeah, very and well presented.
Thank you.
So what is the inner function for the transitive function?
Yeah. So inner function is going to be either XOR or AND. I mean, but yeah, there at ADT prime is ADT prime, the one that we used here, that was kind of an addressing function. There we are going to replace it by inner product, a variant of the inner product. So now there will be 2t bits of input for the new inner function, and both of them, if both of them are Hadamard code words of some k bit strings, then then we'll take the inner product of those k-bit strings. So that works.
And it is transitive.
Yeah, inner product is transitive.
Yeah.
And then on the top we have parity. So
right. Yeah. Thanks.
I guess I'll stop the recording.
Yes. Shall